Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Law and Crime. I'm Jesse Weber here with trial attorney Brad Micklin. We have a lot happening here on the program, so let's get started right now. Okay, Brad, let's break it down. What do you think the impact of his testimony was? Because, again, called as the last witness, that was also partly due to a scheduling reason. He testified in the first trial, was called by the defense. Maybe something that he said worked because, again, there was that 8-4 split. What did you hold on to with his testimony?
I think usually they call a witness like this because they want to show that the beating was personal. I think here they're trying to show it was so egregious and so violent that it had to be somebody with greater motive than Segura may have had over the getting rid of his child support.
Maybe that could be what it is. And the idea here that there was this violent struggle, could one person have done this? They expressed the idea of multiple weapons and that he couldn't, it wouldn't seem logical or possible that someone would take the butt of a gun and use it to beat Brandy Peters. That was not strong enough of an object. But today we're waiting for the closing arguments, and I want to get some perspective right now. Joining me right now, all the way from ASU, is law professor Velena Betty. Great to have you here, Professor. I'm glad you're with us because closing arguments, important aspect in a trial. But I'm curious, I want to ask you, do you think the jury has already come up with their decision in their minds before a closing argument in this case? Or do you think that they need to be persuaded one way or another by the prosecution or the defense?
I think they probably have their minds set, at least individually. When they go back to deliberate among each other, a lot of things can change then when they're talking with each other. But probably within their own minds, they've seen so many witnesses. There's been very compelling, interesting testimony in this case so far that I think at this point, both sides just need to kind of tie it together, complete their narrative, and then leave it for the jurors to discuss among themselves.
Well, we think we're going to see some long closing arguments today, which should be good, which should be very fiery. We'll hear both sides about how they ultimately have characterized both sides' evidence, but we're not quite there yet. We'll jump live as soon as we can. Let's play a little bit more of Michael Knox from yesterday. Okay, Brad, what do you think, in your opinion, is the strongest indicators that this crime was either committed by multiple people or was, in fact, committed by the cartel?
I think it's such a heinous crime. I think the first thing the jury needs to get past is Segura the kind of person that would do this? Would he kill over child support money and kill the babies? You could take out Brandy for that reason, but the children, it's a whole nother level. And I think that's the leap a jury needs to make first.
Now, let me ask you this, Professor. The defense was doing a really good job, especially in the last trial, of saying, look, multiple shoe impressions, foreign DNA, the idea of multiple weapons might have been used. Can really one person do this? However, you correct me if I'm wrong, I thought the prosecution did a very strong job at fighting against the defense's theory that the cartel was responsible, because it seemed that the testimony of James Carlos Santos was unreliable. Angel Avila Quijones was in Italy. Monica Peters, who's Brandy Peters' sister, testified that she never witnessed her sister involved in the drug trade, never saw her do anything like that. And we can't forget that Mr. Segura lied to law enforcement. They didn't find a condom indicating which he would have had sex with her earlier on in the day. They didn't find it in the trash. So where are we right now in terms of the defense's theory? Do you think that it was stronger in the first trial than in this trial? Because they added new witnesses and they added more dimension to that theory in this trial than they did in the first trial.
Well, I definitely think the DNA evidence is helpful and is compelling. But you're right, the prosecution has done their job about really creating doubt, sowing doubt about the defense witnesses. I really turn back to what Brad said about, is the jury going to believe that the defendant can commit such a heinous crime, killing children, killing his own child as well? Or is this really something that seems to be done by multiple people, by a cartel, trained assassins, trained killers? Is it that type of a killing instead? But you're right. I mean, a number of the witnesses for the defense have been undermined this time. The prosecution learned from the first time.
Not only does he say he doesn't know anybody involved in this, but he says he was in Italy. But then he said, I can't explain how my DNA would be found there. How am I supposed to reconcile that if I'm sitting on the jury?
I think it depends how hard they press for the jury to believe that it was him. I think if they're hammering, oh, it's him, it was him, then there's a question. I think if they're just saying, look, there was a lot of DNA here, there were other people involved, it's not Segura, that's reasonable doubt, then I think they get away with it.
Professor, the problem is James Carlos Santos's testimony, it was impeached. His credibility was impeached by the idea of, he's a guy who's unreliable, and the idea that he's just making things up and he's taking information that he sees in the media and using it to tell a story. That could very well be what happened here, because we just listened to this man. So is the defense's theory holding water based upon what we just heard?
Honestly, I think the arguments against that defense witness are similar to what a defense attorney would make against a prosecution witness who is otherwise known as a snitch, right? So this is someone who is not reliable, is already incarcerated, has committed another crime. How are you supposed to trust this person? So I think it's a situation that jurors often see, where when there's someone testifying who is incarcerated, who's testifying to the benefit of either side, they're going to be impugned on their character and on their reliability.
Well, I'll tell you what didn't help Henry Segura, and that was the testimony of Kelsey Kennard. Now, this is interesting because he was an inmate with Mr. Segura and said that Segura had some things to say about the murders of Brandy Peters and her children. Watch. Well, Brad, that's never good, now is it, to have him testify to that?
Yeah, it's a challenging development because we all watch TV, and jurors probably watch more law shows than we do. But the first question becomes, well, what did he get in return for this? Was he entrapped? Was he sent in to get this information? Does he have a motive for giving it? Or was Segura maybe trying to look tough in prison to survive? Or did he just admit to a vicious killing?
Professor, in their closing argument, should the defense touch upon this witness by saying, keep going with this narrative that he's not believable, he's just saying whatever he needed to say and help himself? Or could they say, hey, you know what? Segura did admit that. Do you know why he admitted it? Because he was in jail and he was nervous and he wanted to seem bigger than he was and he wanted to seem like a murderer. And that's what he did, folks. Or is that the idea there that you don't even want to admit that your client confessed to a crime? And so which way do you think they're going to go in a closing argument today? Because I feel like they have to address this.
Jesse, you've hit the nail on the head. And just like Brad did, it really is, did he say it? And was he trying to be tough because he's in prison and he's trying to get through? Is he, creating these rap lyrics and saying, I just lost it. I'm someone who can fly off the handle and murder 4 people like that. I just lost it. But frankly, I personally, I think I would go instead the route of this person isn't reliable. It's snitch testimony. They're getting something in exchange. Now, of course, their own witness is opened up to that problem as well. But I think I'd go in that direction, even though the argument is compelling about I was just trying to be tough in prison.
Brad, we've been talking about this here on the network with my colleagues. It seems everyone has been accused of lying in this trial. That Henry Segura has been accused of lying. James Carlos Santos has been accused of lying. This guy has been accused of lying. Now, that's, I guess, typical of a lot of trials, but do you find that in this one, it's just hard to believe anybody?
Well, and that makes it challenging considering it's a retrial and everybody has a second bite at the apple, because normally it would hurt a lot for the defendant to be caught lying. But now you have so many people involved and so many, if you're talking about reasonable doubt and you can't believe anybody, you have to find reasonable doubt, or at least hang.
Professor, if this should result in another hung jury, as the prosecutor, would they go after him a third time, or do they cut their losses here and say, you know what, we just can't make our case?
I think they would charge him again and try and get a plea. I think they'd try to plead it out. I don't know the plea background on this and what they've offered for the second time around, but I think they'd recharge and just try to get this off their docket by getting him to plead to something lower level.
I just say that because I'm concerned that we are left again with more questions than we have answers, and it might be a situation where the jury is split. Remember, you need a unanimous jury verdict here, and I don't know. I don't know which way it's going to go. We're still waiting for closing arguments. I'm keeping a careful eye on the courtroom feed. I see the defendant speaking with his attorney right now. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, maybe we'll be able to jump live. Stay tuned.